Okay, we have now prepared our canvas and our fabric, and we can now join them together. I want to say that canvassing is something that can be extremely confusing, abstract, and therefore intimidating. And I think the reason for that, with many other things in tailoring, is due to the lack of precisely articulated instructions on the subject. When things are vague, more room is made for random interpretations on which people hold on to with their entire lives. So for example, if you are taught canvassing by two different people, you may encounter two completely different perspectives on canvassing and two contradicting opinions. This is not constructive at all. So how do we solve this problem? I think first of all, we have to be very precise in our explanations and descriptions. Second of all, we have to understand all the individual parts of a system before we go ahead and play around with all of them at once. And last but not least, we must seriously avoid vanity metrics. Now, if you don't know what vanity metrics are, in general, they are used in statistics, and they are things that you would measure or care for that may make you feel good or make you look professional and look good, but have no value in the entire process. So for example, if I would now tell you, oh, make sure before you canvas you trim all of these things away, that's very important. It may make me look like someone who cares a lot about the process, but that's like 2 inches of inlay. There's no significance in trimming that away at this moment. So that is, for example, a vanity metric. Now, when it comes to joining these two layers together, which is the essence of canvassing, we have a small problem. And that problem is why canvassing can be very confusing and abstract and, like I said, intimidating. Now, in essence, we're going to join two layers together. Imagine you have two rectangles that have the same contours and exactly the same markings in the middle. If I would ask you to join these two together, it would be very simple. All you have to do is to match the contours, make sure the markings are matching in the center, and boom, you have two matching rectangles. The problem we have here is that our two layers are not exactly the same. They are very similar, but they differ. And they differ in probably 3 ways, I could say. The first thing that makes them different is that one of them is made of 1 layer of fabric and the other is made of 3 layers of canvas, horsehair, and domet. The second thing is that the shapes are also very similar but not exactly the same. So for example, on our forepart, on our fabric, we only have 1 dart, but on our canvas we have a second dart here and we have a cut along the waistline. We don't have that cut along the waistline on the fabric. It's slightly lower, and we also don't have a second dart. The other thing, which is also easily overlooked, is the fact that these are different materials and therefore they react differently to heat and moisture. So as you remember, this was really shrinking by the 4th time that we sprayed it, whereas the fabric may not shrink as much. So all of these things together make them 2 very similar layers, but just slightly different. And matching 2 slightly different layers together is not always as straightforward. So how can we make sure that we make canvassing as systematic and as simple as possible without creating too much room for silly interpretations that may throw us off from the real thing? Very simple. 3 steps are going to make canvassing the most simple, straightforward process as you've ever encountered. Those 3 steps are the following. First of all, we're going to pin our reference points that we marked when we cut out the canvas. Those are the dart, the first button, and the break line. By pinning those 2 down, we establish the vertical axis on both layers. The second step, is we're going to simulate gravity to make sure that there is no tension or pulling going on in between the points that we have pinned down. And the third thing is once everything is pinned down, we're gonna apply the relative layer length to each isolated section to get the shapes that we want. Okay, so having said that, let's start with step 1, which is pinning down the reference points to establish the vertical axis of both layers. So what we're going to do, however you lay this canvas at this moment, is not relevant at all, because all we care for is where this dart is. So you lay your canvas, you can simulate gravity if you want, just to lay it down, and you're going to lay your fabric on top of it and fold the side of your fabric over. This will expose the dart on the inside to you. Now, our dart doesn't continue all the way down on the canvas, so it starts from the top and stops halfway on the waistline. What you're going to do is the following. You're going to take your pins and you're going to match your sewing line on the middle point of the dart, which is between both ends, to the center of the dart on your canvas. If you want to know exactly where the middle is, what you can do is you can take a pen, just find the middle of that dart, and if you run your pen through it, it's going to fall in between the point where those two edges were joined together, and that will give you the exact middle of the dart on the canvas. So we are going to match our sewing line on the middle of the dart between the 2 points to exactly the middle of the dart on the canvas. We do that by holding this point down, and we continue matching the sewing line to the middle of the dart on the canvas all the way up. Once we've done that, we're going to hold those 2 points down and flip the fabric over, and now we're going to place our fingers right in front on top of those 2 points that we are holding down from behind. So now we have 2 points. One pin at the top, one pin at the other point. So we're going to pin both points down to the canvas. Like so. Okay? Now the next thing we have to do is to pin. First of all, let's just pull both ends to straighten things out so that we don't have too much wrinkles. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to pin down our first button. Now you'll notice that your cross grain is going in a certain direction. You may want to straighten this or play around with it. At this point, I wouldn't do anything to it. I would only focus on those reference points. So let's pin our first button. And that's that. Okay? Now the next thing we have to pin down is our break line. Be very careful that when you're pinning things down, you are not pulling anything. You just allow them to rest as they are. Now, without any tension, we are going to try to match our break line at the very top. And that's it. Now, once we have pinned these 1, 2, 3, 4 points, we are restricting the movement of fabric. So it can't go in all different directions. It can now be guided to very specific directions. It's very simple. When you hold these 2 points together, when you hold them down, you can't have the fabric go that way, because now it tells you that you shouldn't go beyond that point. Okay? So what we're going to do now is the following. As these two are together, we are just going to take the canvas, only the canvas, and pull along the center line that we have marked on the fabric. Just simulate gravity for a second, like so. Now, if you do that and there are no severe pullings or tensions between these points, you can continue, okay? Now, putting these pins in doesn't mean that they are exactly going to stay there. We may have to remove them at some point once the rest of the pins go in, just to allow the fabric to settle. But as for now, there is no problem in what we are doing, so we can continue. Now, the next thing you're going to do is to work in sections. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to take the forepart and we're going to, from the waist point, where the front button is pinned down and the bottom of the dart is pinned down, or the middle of the dart, we're going to lift up our forepart. If you want, you can just gently pull it away so it doesn't fall down. And what you're going to do is you're going to bring your fabric over and you're going to allow your canvas to lay on the board without any restrictions or any tension or any distortions. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to do the same with the fabric. And because you have pinned these 2 points down, the fabric is directed in a specific direction, and that is going to be the same as the canvas. So very gently allow the front half of your forepart to roll down, just like that. You see there is a bubble maybe here, don't worry about that too much. Now the next pin is going to go at the bottom here. So one pin here. It's not a specific point, it's just at the lower part, almost at the bottom, somewhere in the corner here. And the next one after that is going to be in between the first button and the lower pin that you've just placed. Wherever you want to place it, you can do it. It doesn't need to be on a specific line. The main point is that these pins are holding the fabric in the correct position down to the canvas. Now, once you've done that, you're going to take the middle, pin and just gently brush your fingers over it. You're not pulling, you're not clearing. You just gently brush and place one pin on the middle line that you have chalked down the center. Once you've done that, you can do the same with the bottom and go all the way to the line on the side, which is the third line that we marked, and place a pin there. Okay? Now after that, we're going to continue brushing away the fabric. You can either lift it up and allow it to just lay down. That helps as well. So once you've done that, you can place a pin right next to the one in the middle on the third chalk line. So that's that, okay? Now, the next thing we have to do is to make sure that our break line is matching in the middle. We don't need to make much effort for that. If you, again, simulate gravity by only pulling the canvas, just gently. I'm not pulling it apart, I'm just giving it a tug. Just like that, moving it from those 2 points. All you have to do is to just feel with your fingers over your material to see if they are joined together, more or less. You may feel empty spaces or whatsoever, although you shouldn't, but if you do feel them, don't be afraid. Just first check if the middle of your break line is matching, and it's exactly matching in that point. So now you can go ahead and pin in between the pins that are on your break line, like that, and like that. And now we have more or less pinned the front half and partially the side of the forepart. Now, remember when I was telling you that we have to close this cut but still allow some movement? I'm going to explain to you now why that is. When we take out a dart, that dart has side effects around that point where the fabric is taken out. That side effect presents itself as surplus, especially around the waist area. Most of the time, it's not on the front, it presents itself on the side because we keep the front straight. So that is extra length, as you would call it, okay? If we would close this canvas in a way that it wouldn't be able to open up, we would never be able to do the following. If I would place my hand here and just pivot the canvas, so basically pivot the canvas forwards so that all that surplus in the side goes to the front, and this opens up, therefore, I would never be able to lay this in such way that the surplus of the fabric is now also flat and matches the canvas. Imagine that if I would do that, that the cut would not open up. If the cut doesn't open up, I can't go forward. I can't pivot this forward and allow this side to lay flat. If I can't allow the side to lay flat, I will have a flat canvas but surplus on the cloth around the waist, and that is not ideal because we want the canvas and the fabric to always be of the same amount of length, more or less, and match each other on many points as possible. So having said that, this is the next part of our canvassing, which focuses on the side. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to just, again, pick this up, allow this to lay down while I'm brushing with my hand very gently over it. And I'm going to put a pin right below the cut on the canvas, which is here. Okay? After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot the canvas from this point forward so that all this surplus ends up going to the front and that this side lays down flat, like so. So now all that has gone to the front and this can lay down flat. Okay, so now the fabric and the canvas are one. What I then have to do is to brush this up. I'm not pulling the fabric, I'm just positioning the fabric and making sure that it lays flat on top of the canvas. And once I'm up all the way close to the armhole, what I'm going to do is hold the pin at the tip of the dart, at the apex of the dart down, and I'm just going to give this a tiny amount of pull, not pulling as in like all the way, but just give it a pull, a small amount of tension, and pin this at the armhole level, like so. Okay? Now, what you'll notice is that because we took out a dart here and we don't have a dart on the canvas, you may have a tiny amount of surplus floating exactly on the same point where our dart was taken out. What do you need to do with it? Well, this is where we bring in tailoring and we allow this fabric to be compressed when we are sewing everything together and around the armhole. Now, I'm not a fan of using too much of the iron to do manipulations like this, but fortunately, this is an area where we can do that without having troubles later on. So how do we deal with this? Simple. We again lift the forepart halfway and allow everything here to lay flat. From the top, we look at our grain, make sure that the grain is following a straight line. And here we have two pins. You can go along the second pin, which is roughly around the shoulder area, and make sure that that is flat and put a pin in the opposite end. And what you see here is a tiny amount of fabric that we can easily, feel free to use a pressing cloth, but this is a practice piece, so I'm not going to do that now. We can easily just use the iron to compress this, and fortunately for us, this will more or less remain flat. It shouldn't be a lot. If you have too much, that's a problem. You can't just compress all of it. If it's only a tiny amount, you can do that. This is where you are making use of the iron because you can. And otherwise, if it's too much, well, your dart has been probably too big and therefore it's not matching the fabric. So, having said that, you can now, if you want, put another pin along here, and this is how you would prepare your canvas. Now, what you can do now is to assess how well this is married up and how this will hang. The good thing about pins is that they will allow you to pick up the work and see how things hang. I'm going to pick this up in a second and assess it with you. Sometimes what you'll see from different tailors is that they would lay this on top of lay the fabric on top of the canvas and not move anything anymore and just baste. I'm not a fan of that because I want to be able to pick it up, have a look, see how everything hangs, see how the shape is, and if I have to make corrections, I can quickly do that. If you baste everything very carefully, then you are not really making it easier for yourself to undo all your work and then redo it. And so make sure you put in pins because you can work around them a lot easier. So let's pick this up and have a quick look. When we pick up our forepart to assess how it's hanging after we've pinned both layers together, the first thing we have to make sure of is that we're holding it correctly. And we are supposed to hold the forepart up down the center line all the way at the highest point, like so. Then we are going to have a look at the front half of the forepart. If it's hanging smoothly and there are no diagonal, vertical, horizontal pulls like things like this or things like that in any kind of direction, then that is a good sign and you can probably rely on what you've done and continue assessing the rest. One of the things you can do is to give the forepart a shock by doing this. And by giving the forepart a shock, you can have a sense of how these two are harmonized together. Now, if they move as one, like so, without the fabric moving in a different direction than the canvas, and you see horizontal waves, like so, down the forepart, then that again is another good sign, and you can continue assessing the rest. When you are done with the front half, you're going to have a look at the side. Now, when you look at the side, first of all, be aware that we have a pleat there, and that pleat has as a consequence, a small bubble. That is not really something that we should be worried about unless we have, like I said, a very severe distortion there, then that should be assessed. But if it's just hanging there and you just have a small bubble right on top of that area, then that is fine. As you look up, one of the most confusing things that you're going to notice is that you're going to have this surplus around the sigh area, right on top of where the dart is taken out on the canvas. The reason why we have that is because we have a dart on the canvas and we don't have a dart on our forepart. If you had made the canvas without a dart there, you would have a canvas with less shape, and therefore this is very unlikely to show itself to you, to show up. But fortunately, this is an area that we can actually compress with the iron permanently. And by the time it goes around the body, very little of this surplus is going to be visible. So here we have to use the iron in our favor. Apart from that, that's literally all you have to assess, for now at least. So another thing you can do is you can apply the simulation of gravity in 3 different ways. The first one is you're going to pull along the middle, along that line, on the fabric only, just a little bit, to see what exactly is happening. If you don't see any drags, any pulls between your pins, nothing is doing this or that, then that is a good sign. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to do exactly the same, but now you're only going to pull the canvas. So again, double check if the canvas is being pulled and nothing distorts and you only see the ends that you are pulling elevating like now, then that is fine as well. You have to focus on the areas between your pins. Once you've done that, you're going to pull both of them at the same time, and then if you do that, and again, nothing changes, nothing moves, the front half doesn't distort, the side doesn't distort, then you're good to go. Now, I can very much understand that you can become fussy about things that you're insecure about. So for example, I have something here that I can imagine you looking at it and be like, oh, there's a drag, there's a pull. But this is not an area that we have pinned down. You have to focus on the areas between your pins and see if there are distortions there, especially in the front half of the jacket. Having said that, let's now continue and baste our fabric to our canvas.